Jack Smith's Deposition, Part 12. Michigan, Vice President Pence, and the First Amendment. Welcome to Law and Society. What I'm doing is going through Jack Smith's deposition and breaking it down into digestible chunks. And the reason I'm doing it is because it is important for every American to remember that Donald Trump was responsible for a conspiracy to overthrow the American constitutional republic. And he also incited an insurrection in order to accomplish that goal. This needs to be repeated. This needs to be part of history because it is what happened. It is what we saw. And we are hearing Donald Trump and his pardoned insurrectionists trying to rewrite history. So we, the rest of us, we the people, must not let it happen. So remember to subscribe and like, and let's get started. I will read out the questions and then Jack Smith's answers. Question, and this questioning is happening by Representative Lofgren. On another state, on November 20th, Mr. Trump called Republican legislators from Michigan to the White House and urged them to remove the Biden electors and replace them with electors that would elect Trump. They subsequently to that made a statement that there was no evidence for that and went back. And the electors were certified as the votes had indicated they should be. Subsequent to that, in December, there was an effort to create fake electors. And in fact, on December 14th, when the electoral colleges meet in all state legislatures, there were 16 fake electors in the basement in Michigan, and 4 of them tried to get into the Capitol to overturn the election. Did you look at that whole phenomena? Smith, we did. How would that have played, if at all, in your prosecution? Smith, well, I think that event you're referring to, and I think we interviewed some of the law enforcement officers who were there that day when they were trying to get in, what they were doing and what the email traffic among co-conspirators showed is that they were trying to mimic the procedures that are required by the Electoral Count Act, but they couldn't mimic them. And if I recall, the email traffic on this stated that we have to follow these procedures. And then when it became clear they couldn't follow the procedures, it was like, well, do the best you can to follow as many as you can. And so I think, if I do recall certain states, and I may have been Michigan, that the electors had to convene in a certain government location. And so as a result, I believe there may have been a state official involved in trying to get into, and I'm thinking of the right situation, get them in there. So again, they could mimic the procedures, even though they were not the electors that represented the will of the people of how the vote was actually counted. Question, can you just summarize for us the actions Mr. Trump took with Vice President Pence? How did Donald Trump want Pence to overturn the election results? Smith, ultimately, he wanted him to just hand him the election to say he won. There were different proposals that President Trump and his co-conspirators put to Mike Pence, but in essence, he wanted Mike Pence to impose his own choice about who should be president over the will of the American people who voted in the election. Question, was one of those ways that Donald Trump tried to pressure Mr. Pence was to reject the lawful elector certificates of their votes during the electoral counting process? Was that one of the ways that you recall? Smith, that's correct. Question, how did Mr. Pence respond back to Mr. Trump's pressure about rejecting the lawful elector certificates? Smith, I think Mike Pence, Vice President Pence, falls into the category that I described before. He did something that was very hard to do. He went against his party. He paid a price for it. But I think, again, someone like that, putting country over party, I think he would have been an effective witness. He did not agree to go along with that. Question, Mr. Pence, Mr. Pence's response to President Trump's pressure is this yet another example of evidence that showed Mr. Trump knew or should have known that he was saying to the American people was false regarding the election on 2020. Smith, yes, the vice president was one, and this is alleged in the indictment in our filings, that he was one of the several people saying that he was not seeing outcome determinative fraud that Donald Trump was claiming. Question: what would have happened if Vice President Pence would have gone along and refused to count the lawful elector certificates? Smith, well, thankfully, we don't know. But I would say that he and the other people who stood up and said, I'm not going to do that, may have changed the course of history in terms of our country of having an election where someone took power in our country who didn't actually win the election. So as I said, I think it took a lot of courage on his part. He's also someone who, as you all know, when the attack on the Capitol happened, he wouldn't leave. People wanted him to leave. And I think, again, that reflects very well on him. Question: can you help now bring us full circle on how you analyze the First Amendment claims with the knowledge of fraud that Mr. Trump was putting out to the American public in 2020 and 2021? Smith, from a legal perspective, this is really quite clear. I think all of us want to make sure people's First Amendment rights are not abridged in a way that they shouldn't be. I think it certainly feel that way. I certainly feel that way. I'm sure everybody in this room feels that way. But there is a very clear carve out for fraud in our case law. The Supreme Court, one case is the Stevens case, talks about that, and there are others. And so when you're committing fraud, meaning you're not just saying something that's untrue, you're saying it knowing it's untrue or with reckless disregard for the truth, that's not protected by the First Amendment. People commit crimes all the time using words. And when someone commits fraud, an investment fraud, or someone commits an affinity fraud, where you try to gain someone's trust, get them to trust you as a general matter, and then you rip them off, you defraud them, that's all words, but it's not protected by the First Amendment. And in a lot of ways, this case is an affinity fraud. The president had the people who he had built up, who had built up trust in him, including people in his own party, and he preyed on that. Some people wouldn't do it, others would. We are lucky that enough wouldn't, that the election was upheld. So it's quite important, this part of what Mike Pence did and the fact that Donald Trump's fraud is not protected by the First Amendment, and the fact that what Donald Trump was doing was trying to get people to do illegal things on his behalf. And that is clear as day over and over again in investigations that have happened for years and years and years. So with that, I end this 12th episode, and I'll come back again and read you more excerpts from Jack Smith's deposition. Thank you for being here. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon.